Value Selling Associates partnered with Selling Power magazine, and we did a survey to both sales reps and sales managers about, first of all, across a number of different industries, about what are some of the challenges that you see when it comes to prospecting. And we defined prospecting as a sales rep contacting someone proactively to get a meeting to ultimately engage and create an opportunity. And today we're going to share with you the research that we uncovered. So as we get starting into this, if you are joining us and are joining in on the conversation socially, please tag any of your comments, Value Selling and VSA webinar. We will be also live tweeting during this event and would love to include your comments in the conversation. So at the end of the day, the question becomes, how do we get more appointments as a sales rep? And I think the question that we're asking is sometimes wrong. The question I would suggest that we want to start asking is, why would any prospect ever want to meet with us? At the end of the day, when we are prospecting, we're interrupting people. It's a good interruption, hopefully, a value-added interruption, and we'll talk a little bit about how we make sure we're a value-added interruption. But we are an interruption, and they're not going to meet with us and ultimately buy from us to meet our needs. They're going to meet with us and ultimately buy from us because we meet their needs and add value to their businesses and their roles. And we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about, how do we flip that? I know I probably get anywhere from a dozen to a half dozen outreach emails and phone calls a day from sales reps. And very rarely is the content of those messages that are asking for my time relevant to me. It's usually, let me tell you about my company. Let me tell you what I do. Let me tell you how cool our new program is, and trying to use them to entice me. And it usually doesn't work. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's dive into exactly what we're going to cover. And a lot of this is a result of not only the research that we're doing, but the work that we do with our clients in what we call Vortex Prospecting. But based on the research that we learned, here's what we're going to talk about today. What is some of the most effective ways to reach new prospects? And what do I need to master as a rep to be as effective as possible in those initiatives? We're going to talk about in the context of what's getting in the way. What are the challenges that we're facing? And most importantly, what are some of the things we can do to overcome those? We're going to identify 3 qualities or skills required to be successful in today's world. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to build credibility with that value-added messaging, as I mentioned. At the end of the day, when it comes to prospecting, we're going to touch on 4 key things. And these are the questions that we hear day in and day out. What do I do and say to get the meeting? When do I do it? When do I outreach? And when is the most effective, whether it's time or frequency? How do I best position those messages in order to get a response? Because we know that many of these unsolicited emails and requests for time and meetings go completely unresponded to. And then how much of this do I need to do to be successful? And one of the key learnings I think we found here is most sales reps underestimate not only how many times they need to try to reach a prospect, but how much time it takes to do this effectively. And we'll talk a little bit about our findings from that perspective. So as I mentioned, our research study was based on a partnership with Selling Power magazine, and we surveyed a number of reps and managers in a variety of different roles as well as industries. And interestingly enough, here is what we found. We asked people to rank or rate what is the hardest part about securing this initial meeting. And you can see here what we found. Overwhelmingly, the number one thing is getting a response. Almost 2 to 1 or 40% greater than the next one of accessing the decision maker and finding the right contact. Interestingly enough, they're probably all related in terms of if I'm not accessing the right decision maker with the right message or finding the right person, the probability that I'm going to get a response is much slimmer. If I'm selling software and somehow end up getting into a executive in a company has nothing to do with that software solution, that's probably dead on arrival from a messaging perspective. So I see a huge correlation between those three. But getting response is harder and harder. And I think that's because of a couple of things. There's a lot of noise in the marketplace. There's a lot of people just like you competing and vying for the executive or the buyer's time, attention, and engagement. So given that, it's harder and harder to get in. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that we teach our clients over time to overcome that. The second question that we ask them are, what do you think are the most effective ways to get that? And not surprisingly, the number one way to get a meeting is still a referral. And we have been using data and research that talks about the power of the referral for years here at Value Selling. For as long as I've been in the organization, we have used data that shows that. In today's world, it's even more powerful because a referral from a credible peer or a credible colleague helps minimize the risk that I'm going to spend some time talking to somebody who's going to waste my time. And so doing that is still critical and leveraging that. What I did find interesting here is that the phone is still perceived as one of the single best ways to get a prospect to engage with you. That said, we're going to see in a few slides later that many sales reps are reluctant to pick up the phone. One of the things that we absolutely review with our clients is the fact that the phone is still an incredibly powerful tool for communication. And while we hear objections from reps like nobody answers their phone, people screen their calls because of caller ID, which is all true, there are still times when people answer their phone. And you'll see in the infographic that I've attached to this webinar, if you choose to download that resource, some great data that talks about how the phone is still good. Interestingly enough, we see lots of other different ways for reaching potential new buyers. And one of the things that we believe is powerful is that we learn how to leverage multiple vehicles of communication over time. Social selling, or more likely social marketing, is still a critical component to help buyers readily recognize who we are. But that doesn't replace the fact that we still need to be present and show up at the opportunities like trade shows where our buyers might be there. So we'll talk about both online and offline mechanisms from that perspective. So here's some other interesting data that came out of this. And again, I found this a little bit surprising. We asked, what do you think are the most important skills that you need to connect? And the number one skill that we heard from clients is doing research to identify the people. And the interesting part of that is probably the most underestimated skill in terms of many clients that we talk to of what a sales rep needs to do to be successful. For example, I was talking with a client last week who has spent a lot of time and energy creating templatized approach to outreach. And the sales reps are not expected to tailor that to the targets they're trying to get to. And yet here we see this need to research. The reason we need to know who our prospects are is so we can tailor the message in the context of why would this individual meet with me to begin with. Again, it's about becoming that value-added interruption. And research is key to that. I think that the other interesting thing is that face-to-face networking is listed at the top, which means how do we have a conversation when we meet someone and network in a compelling way in order to carry that into getting a meeting. And I think this whole art of the conversation and art of creating need in the prospect's mind or potential prospect's mind to engage is something that we all need to get better at. And then finally, I think that the fourth item on here, consistently making cold calls. And we talk about goal calls and warm calls, but consistently picking up the phone and doing that outreach is something that sales reps aren't always doing on a regular basis. And it's powerful that we are creating orchestrated approaches to gain access to these prospects, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So once we identified what the most important skills were that they have, what we asked next is, are you good at it? Or how do you self-assess whether or not you're good at it? And we looked at the top 3 criteria specifically. And what we found out was many of them don't think that they are good at some of these overall skills. So here's a couple examples of outbound prospecting that we found in the reps in terms of volume and of outreach between that. More contacts today than ever is required to get the initial meeting. What we found is when reps self-assess, almost half of them said it is you need 5 or more contacts and outreaches to get an initial meeting. Yet the research showed that many of the reps that we surveyed were giving up too quickly in that outreach. So the data shows it takes more contacts than ever, yet the data also showed that sales reps were giving up too quickly, getting frustrated after 4, 5, 6 non-responsive emails, and therefore giving up on some of those. Huge dichotomy of making sure that we are working on a process basis to continue that conversation. We also went into some of these quote unquote selling qualities and asked them to rate the reps or themselves in this. And again, as I look at this, I see this is incredibly powerful in terms of our ability to move the bell curve and improve our ability in these selling activities. So in every area, from the fair, good, and very good, if we move the needle on that over to the excellent, we have huge opportunities to drive productivity increases within our organization. And it's not surprising to me that there is huge opportunity here because, again, we hear from our clients that this is an overall challenge. Willingness and commitment is not necessarily teachable. That is the traits that we're hiring for, but it can be demonstrated in a process-based approach. And then the other 2 skills are critical as well. So as we kept on going down this perspective, we went from, okay, what are the challenges that you have in getting it, to what do you think are the challenges internal to you that make a difference. And again, I think I was surprised at what the number one challenge was in terms of organization and consistency in their outreach. Not surprised that we give up too quickly when we're cold calling. But the second thing that really surprised me was that we have reps self-reporting that they don't want to use the phone. They don't want to pick up the phone. And that came through in terms of a couple of things. If they answer, I don't know what to say. If I get voicemail, I don't know how to leave a concise, compelling message. And so in light of those two things, I'd rather not put myself in the position to get stuck and sound irrelevant to the prospect in those situations. So looking at, again, those top three pieces of information, all areas that we can overcome with a consistent approach to outreach. And again, I think this data confirms what we hear from our clients all the time about some of the challenges that we have with prospects. And it leads to the next conclusion that we got from this, which is when we work with our clients, we often ask them, do you know how many new prospects you need to make your number? And it's a very powerful question, because I would, based on my experience, say 8 out of 10 of our clients don't know how to answer that question. They know they need more, but they don't know how many they need to be going after in order to ultimately meet their number. And if you don't know how many you need, how do you know whether you're doing enough? And so we back that into, if you know how many prospects you need, are you effectively spending enough time to get there? And I think generally speaking in this survey, we found that sales reps are not dedicating enough time to this prospecting, organic prospecting effort based on the research that we found when we compared how they report on that. We often work with our clients and kind of reverse engineer this for them. What's your quota? How many meetings do you need to get that quota? What's your win rate on those meetings? And backing into that. And then looking at that, okay, if on average it's going to take me 5 to 10 on a good day contacts to get that meeting, how much time do I need to be dedicating for all of those contacts with all of those people to do the research to be relevant, and then to learn from the efficacy of the messaging that I have and fine-tune my strategy? And all of that takes time. And so thinking about the proactive calendar management is a key component to successful prospecting. And almost all reps underestimate how much they need to do. And that is demonstrated clearly in the next question that we asked is, did the reps have a quota for meetings? And I find this is a direct correlation to each other. If I don't know how many I need, I can't measure and manage to it. So thinking through that, if there isn't a quota set for you, do you as a rep have an idea of how many meetings you need to get to be successful and generate the activity that you need to generate in order to generate the results that you're expected to deliver on? And it's kind of this pipeline management, right? If I get 10 meetings, 5 turn into opportunities, 3 turn into proposals, and I can win 1 or 2 of those, I am those might be great numbers for me and my business, but it starts with that 10 meeting number. That's kind of how that funnel works through, and making sure I'm doing enough to get that. The next question we asked is, okay, if this is what you expect people to do, how often are you updating and upgrading the training and development for the people that are doing this? Because technology changes, the world changes, the messaging changes. And interestingly enough, over 50% of the respondents said either it's just once a year as part of onboarding, or it's once a year period. So lots of opportunity to integrate and align continuous development and continuous education into these processes. And in today's world, I think continuous education is more important than ever. Sharing best practices, learning from each other. We just did some training here at Value Selling, and the acronym shared with us by the trainer, which I loved, was for salespeople working together. Make sure you're casing, C-A-S-E-ing, everything. And that stood for copy and steal everything. We as sales reps should not be reinventing the wheel if we don't have to. We should be leveraging best practices, always fine-tuning our craft. You're all on this call today in order to learn something and make it an personal investment in your own development to stay on top of the game. As organizations, those are important processes for us to build in and make available for ourselves as well as our teams. So what was some of the conclusions that came out of this webinar? Well, I think it's a couple of things. We really wanted to understand what sales reps think those challenges are and how are they dealing with them? What are they doing to overcome them? I think we got some good validation on what we know those challenges are. It is harder and harder to get meetings today with prospects for a number of reasons. Our buyers are barraged with messaging. No one has the time to go on what I would call a fishing expedition to learn about something just for the sake of learning about something. So how we engage them has to be creating messages that is from that prospect's point of view. What is the value we can add to that prospect? Not just what do I need to accomplish to get the meeting. And thinking that through takes time, and it takes a little research. But once you get that process down, it is much easier to create those value-added messages and become a value-added interruption. The next thing is, if you don't know what your goal is, it's very difficult to know where or if you're achieving success with those meetings. So thinking through, what is my goal? If you have a quota, great. If you don't, self-manage that. Create your quota. Look at the goals. Back into the number of contacts. Do the research on yourself to know what you need to do to be successful. The one thing that we know for sure is consistency is key in prospecting. I believe that calendar management and calendar blocking is key to success. So looking at your calendar, when are you cold calling or warm calling to those contacts? When are you time blocking your time to send your email messages? When are you time blocking your time to contribute to social conversations and add value socially and online? Are you scheduling those offline networking opportunities and managing that? But but all of that time blocking becomes really key, and thinking through that consistency of doing it again and again. One of the things that we know is most successful for prospecting is this consistency and persistency in messaging. The one thing that we can't always predict is when our prospect is going to start thinking about solutions that we might have and the problems that we might solve. So staying top of mind and staying top of their memory is key to engaging when the time is right. Picking up the phone. We've got to get over the fear. And the way we get over that fear is being very deliberate in knowing what we're going to say when they answer. God forbid they answer. What are we going to say? How are we going to engage? And value selling works with clients on the process to create that messaging, as well as specific tactics that improve the efficacy of those initial conversations, from what is in the message to how you handle the common objections to additional getting those additional meetings. And then content is king. Thinking about what we call our sphere of influence of content that we can share to establish our credibility and give someone a reason to engage with us. We're sharing 3 pieces of content with you today: these slides, an infographic, and then the actual research study that is a result of the work that we did with Selling Power. So you get kind of 3 versions of what might make sense for you. But that is the type of content that we share with our prospects when we're trying to engage them and how we could potentially partner to improve the efficacy that they have in prospecting. Content is key. The right content to the right people will help you open the door and establish that credibility. Remember, it's not about you. It's about them. What's in it for them to spend a little time with you? What's in it for them? What will they get out of a meeting from you? We know what you'll get out of it, which is interesting but often irrelevant in terms of your ability to capture that meeting and secure it. So as we look at this high-level analysis, what does that mean? Well, there's a couple of things that we think that you need to do. And if you weren't on last month's webinar that Chad Sanderson hosted for us, one of the things that I would do is suggest you go back into that webinar and review some of what he talked about, because he got very tactical and specific on a number of the things that we're going to talk about. But here's what we would suggest that you need to think about implementing in your process on an ongoing basis. If you don't have the business acumen to confidently have a business conversation with an executive, that is something that is a skills gap that probably should be closed. I am often asked, what is the number one thing I need to do to sell to the executive level in my companies? And we tell them point blank, it's to become conversant in the language of business so that you can have a business conversation. And quite frankly, for many of us, a business conversation is much easier than a technical conversation. So think about how you're going to up your business acumen. Value Selling has training solutions and learning solutions that go specifically at this challenge. And it is a critical skill for most of our clients, especially the entry-level positions, which are often the people that are doing the prospecting, business development, SDRs. That is for many organizations, those are people that are 1, 2, 3 years out of college, may have had a great liberal arts background, but might not have the business acumen to have a business conversation. Creating a multi-touch point, multi-channel approach. Until you meet with me, you don't necessarily know what my preference for communication is. And so toward that end, If I don't know how you want to communicate, I am going to try to reach you in any way I can. I'm going to try to reach you on the phone. I'm going to try to reach you on email. I'm going to try to meet you through the social platforms. I'm going to try to meet you at networking events if they're there. I'm going to try to engage you with content, but thinking through what that multi-channel, multi-communication approach is important. Consistency, persistence, and confidence. We know that when we do get the meetings, on average, it's taking over 5 to 10 touch points. That means I have to be extremely persistent and not give up too soon. And so understanding that is important. The consistency comes into what is the spacing of that, and how do I go at a multi-channel approach in terms of multiple modes of communication to be most successful. And then having the confidence with the messaging and the communication style that when that engagement happens, I know what to say, I know how to say it, and I can execute confidently. Measurement, measuring the messaging that works, measuring the intervals that are effective, measuring the amount of outreach to generate those calls is important. If I don't measure what I'm doing, I cannot manage and improve it. Now, the good news is for many of us, our companies and employers have developed and invested in technology stacks that will give us tremendous amounts of data and analytics, and that can be used to help hone, improve the efficacy of what we're doing. Calendar management, simple. We've kind of built on that, but it is important because this is the hard work part of sales that requires discipline and execution. And prospecting for most of us has to be the non-negotiable time blocks on our calendars that we do not sacrifice under any circumstances. When something comes up and my call block is interrupted, I don't cancel that. I move it. And I figure out how to make sure that I'm consistently hitting the amount of time and energy that it takes to be successful. And then how do I continuously learn? Not only how to continuously learn to be successful in today's marketplace, but learn from the work that I'm doing and how do I improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of my approach in my messaging, my phone calls, my objection handling, and my research to get at those right people. Creating that continuous learning environment. For those of you that are fortunate to work for organizations that believe in that type of investment, maximize it. For those of you that have to find ways to learn on your own, there are many, many different ways to approach that, from webinars like today through other options that you can be looking at to make sure you are staying at the top of your craft and the top of your profession in order to maximize your ability to be successful.